Hasan Piker went on The Daily Show, and David Hogg went on Bill Maher talking about how the Democrat Party needs to change its messaging so young white men don't feel like they're walking on eggshells when they're entering into a political discourse. And it makes me realize how fragile young white men have become. And I get asked all the time, because I'm a fairly young white progressive person who's also a combat veteran, who's a firefighter, who's a Christian pastor, how do we message to young white men? And I struggle with that because I'm kind of a misandrist, but also they need therapy. If they are unable to emotionally regulate when they are made uncomfortable in a political setting, they need therapy. And I want to liberate us all from the oppressive systems that we are part of. And the patriarchy is one of those. And if we're continuing to pander to young white men, all we're doing is upholding and sustaining a patriarchal system. The second thing I would advise young white men is go to church, read the Bible, because over and over again, Jesus says the first will be last and the last will be first. Jesus wants you to be humble enough to sit down and to learn. The only person that taught Jesus a lesson was a woman. Jesus said something to and the woman was like, what? Not even dogs deserve scraps? And Jesus was like, wow, a woman, you need to be able to be humble enough to allow somebody to teach you. If you are a young white man, this is why I struggle with relationships with young white men, because they're so fragile. I grew up, I was an infantry Marine. When I did something wrong, I got beat up and I didn't do it again. I am not saying violence is the answer. I am saying accountability is the answer. Somebody who is smarter than you, who's struggled more than you, who's more educated than you, who's done more organizing than you, will give you an answer, and you need to sit down, shut up, and do what they're told. If you are a young white man who wants to achieve liberation, who is progressive, that might involve you not being at the head of the table. And I know that frustrates some people. I know I like power too. I am the head at the table. I'm the pastor of my church. I get it. We all want to be in charge of some things. But when it comes to liberation, when it comes to allowing us to escape these unjust systems and break our chains, you will need to sit down, be humble, and pick somebody up. That's what you need to do, because the first will become last. That is how we achieve liberation, not by pandering to young white men, not by changing our messaging, but by treating young white men like they're intelligent, like they're smart, being honest with them, not coddling them like they're little children, treating them like little babies, but treating them like adults and telling them that they're wrong when they're wrong, holding them accountable when they're accountable, and maybe giving them credit when they deserve credit. I made a post about how David Hogg and Hasan Piker are offering the Democratic Party some opportunities to message differently to young white men. And I didn't offer really helpful guidance, and because I'm not a political strategist, I'm not a Democrat strategist. So the only thing I can do is offer how I left my misogyny, which obviously I'm a young white man, and so I'm obviously still a part of, but at least I can tell my path away from being a young white Republican with conservative policies into the liberal progressive person that I am today. In 2016, I was nominated to be the state representative in my district by the Republican Party. Look at that cute little white boy. But I changed my party when Donald Trump announced that he was running for president, and this is why. Because as a Republican, I wouldn't be able to represent the vulnerable populations, the minority groups, Burke said. As a Marine, my integrity is really important to me, and I wouldn't be able to represent the ideals that inspired me to fight in Iraq and Afghanistan. Because when I was fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, I had Iraqi and Afghan allies next to me, and I recognized that these were refugees and immigrants that needed my support when I came home from war. I also served with people from all over the United States. I'm a white boy from Fairfield County. He's from LA. He's from Chicago. He's from Mississippi. I learned what it means to live in the United States and represent a pluralistic society. When I got home from the Marine Corps, I used the GI Bill to get a degree in English and religious studies. And I thought that we lived in a post-racial country because I just got home from serving in combat where I had people who were black in charge of me. I didn't have any women in charge of me. And so I thought that we were post-race in this country because in war, it didn't matter. And so I didn't recognize the pervasiveness of a white supremacist patriarchal system that we're in. In one of my political science classes called War, there was a second career black woman who was older than the rest of the class. And she was trying to introduce the concept that white supremacy was pervasive within American culture. I was like, no, what are you talking about? I just got home from war. That's not true, because I still had not done the work within therapy to love myself, because I was still insecure and not humble enough. And I didn't have the intellectual humility to learn from a woman who was older than me, more experienced and more knowledgeable. And I thank God for women like that who continue to educate me throughout my education. When I got to Yale and I had more brilliant women in my classroom, I recognized that people didn't listen to the things that they said simply because they were women. And I would repeat the things that women would say verbatim. And people would listen to me because I'm a white guy. And they didn't, I would say the same thing they did. And I was like, okay, there's something wrong here. And it started making me become a little awakened to the reality of this. Also, facing discrimination as a veteran made me recognize maybe other people are facing discrimination too, and I should also listen to them about their experiences. I dated a communist while I was at seminary who convinced me that people shouldn't have to work in order to live. And I was like, yeah, no, but if people have a job, then they have meaning and they have value in their life. And she was like, you shouldn't have to work in order to survive. And so I thank God for women who are smarter than me, who were patient with me when I was angry, when I didn't have the opportunity to go through therapy to work on myself and love myself. I didn't say these things because I wanted to get laid. I didn't say these things because I'm getting paid. I say these things because they're the right thing to say. I have a wonderful wife, 2 beautiful boys. Those are the ones who are making noises right now. So the way I think that we message to young white men is by educating them, not by coddling them, not by making them feel like they're walking on eggshells, by holding them accountable, not by holding their hand and coddling them, but telling them when they're wrong, by helping them get the work they need in therapy to love themselves and stop being angry, to give them educations, and then also possibly giving them union membership. So this is how the Democrat Party messages to young white men: by helping them get into therapy, by modeling good behavior, by modeling accountability, by educating them, making sure that they get an education, and by giving them union membership. Because historically, educated white men vote Democrat. Historically, unions vote Democrat. And I know that's shifting, but that's because we need unions that actually protect working families. This is how we message to young white men: by giving them lives that make them feel happy, make them feel secure, they're not so angry and insecure and because they feel like they're walking on eggshells, because you can't even tell them they're wrong because they're so unable and fragile to handle any sort of accountability. Young white men need accountability, they need education, they need therapy, and they need union membership. I didn't just wake up this way. I still have a lot of learning to do. I still have a lot of growing to do. And all young white men, and white men included, have to understand that they may need to decenter themselves as part of the narrative in order to achieve liberation, because we are all trapped within this patriarchal system. And in order to achieve liberation, in order to break our chains, we need to form a common collective that involves decentering the voices of white men and changing the patriarchal narrative so we all can be liberated and we can all live good, happy lives, because that is very possible for every single one of us to achieve liberation and to achieve happiness. Because that's what liberation really is: to experience joy, to not be angry, and to just enjoy life.